Good afternoon, everyone. This is the December 1st, 2020 meeting of the Land Use Committee of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette, sitting as a special zoning committee. Mr. Adler, who I will refer to as John pretty much the rest of the afternoon, would you please call the roll?
Trustee Dodd?
Here.
Trustee Plunkett?
Here.
Chairman Barrow?
Here, and so I see that we're all present. We have a quorum, and we can proceed. I'll first ask John to describe the circumstances of our meeting today and how residents and the public can participate remotely.
This is a meeting conducted remotely via Microsoft Teams. For those watching this video in the future, the state of Illinois is currently under a stay-at-home order issued by Governor J.B. Pritzker due to the coronavirus global pandemic. As a result, all in-person governmental meetings have been canceled. However, the Open Meetings Act now permits electronic meetings of governmental bodies like the Land Use Committee, sitting in a special zoning committee. And this afternoon, we are conducting our business in compliance with state law. The meeting is being broadcast live on local cable access channel 6. It's also being broadcast on the internet on YouTube Live, and the URL for that is www.youtube.com/user/Village of Wilmette/live. To participate in the meeting, you can join through Microsoft Teams. Visit the Village's website at www.wilmette.com and find the calendar event for the Land Use Committee meeting. There's a link for you to join the meeting. You'll also find the meeting agenda and case report under the calendar. Alternatively, you can view the meeting on channel 6 or on YouTube. You can call in to the meeting, allowing you to listen and speak using your phone. The phone number is 872-239-8225, and this afternoon's meeting code is 388-473-36#. You may also submit your comments through YouTube Live. A member of the village staff will read your comments to the Land Use Committee. All comments to the Land Use Committee will be recorded in the meeting minutes as we typically do. For our meeting guests joining by Teams, when you are not speaking, please keep your device muted to minimize disruption of the proceedings and your video turned off so that the committee members can be seen.
Thank you, John. Let me add one other housekeeping item. Our meeting today is a legal proceeding, and as such, all testimony must be given under oath. If you're planning to testify, please raise your right hand and be sworn as follows. Do you swear or affirm that you will tell the truth in the testimony that you're about to give? If so, please say I do. Thank you. So let me briefly describe the purpose of our meeting today. For those that are not trustees or member of the village staff, we gave final plat approval for the Optima development on Green Bay Road and Central Street recently by the board. That followed lengthy meetings back in February and March by the Plan Commission, 2 lengthy meetings, and 2 lengthy meetings by the Board of Trustees, culminating in our approval of the Optima development project. That was approved at our very last in-person meeting. At the time we gave that approval, a number of members of the board, and I think it's fair to say it was the sense of the board, that we wanted to take a review of the standards for commercial development in the village center area so that we were proceeding with development in a thoughtful and a coherent manner rather than just in one-off building, one-off building, one-off building. This meeting today will be the first step in that process. The purpose of today's meeting will be to review requiring any development in the village center zoning district over a certain size and or on a certain size lot to obtain planned unit development approval. For anyone watching, I note that any recommendation that we make today to the board is advisory in nature, and any final decision regarding any changes to our zoning ordinances are made by the board. If they are to act on whatever recommendation we make today, I expect that will be addressed at the December 8th, 2020 meeting. So our first order of business is to approve the October 19, 2020 minutes of our last meeting. I know all the trustees have reviewed those minutes. Are there any corrections or changes to those? Seeing none, can we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Very well. John, would you call the roll on the motion to approve the minutes?
Trustee Dodd?
Yes.
Trustee Plunkett?
Yes.
Chairman Barrow?
Yes, so the minutes of our October 19 meeting have been approved. And now, John, if you would make a presentation to us on the principal topic for which we're here today, and we will then follow that up with whatever questions we may have following that presentation.
Thank you, Chairman Barrow. You did a very nice job at the beginning, sort of summarizing why we are here. What staff is recommending, and it has changed slightly since we sent out the packet before Thanksgiving, but what staff ultimately is recommending is that for any structure over 42 feet in height, or any structure or development that's over 3.0 floor area ratio in the village center, that those structures or developments be required to go through the plan unit development special use process. In the memo from staff, we did present a number of examples of buildings that have been built in the past, and their approximate height and floor area ratio. The Optima development that's at 705 11th Street that was done in the mid-90s, and the Verona development that is at 1107 Greenleaf, both were, as I recall, by right buildings, meaning they were meeting the height limit at that time, which was 40 feet, and the floor area ratio at that time, which was 3.0. We also provided information on what is known as Art House, which is the apartment building at 1121 Greenleaf, and that building was built by right under the current village center zoning, which is a height of 52 feet, and while there is no floor area ratio, in this case the floor area ratio is around 3.0, and that was dictated by the height of the building, the setbacks, and the parking that was required. We also give examples of the M&R building and the Optima building, which hasn't been developed, which are taller, M&R 65 feet to the roof, and the Optima building 62 feet or 72.66 feet to the top of the penthouse roof. And both of those have greater FAR than what we're recommending be the trigger for plan unit development, special use being required. Originally in staff's memo, we tied it to a minimum lot area of 10,000 square feet. We've since decided that probably doesn't make a lot of sense because while we are fairly confident that it would be very difficult to build a building on a lot, a new building that was 40, 42 feet or taller on a lot smaller than that, we're not absolutely sure that it's impossible. And obviously, if we're concerned about a 52-foot high building on a 10, 20, 30,000 square foot lot, we should probably be similarly concerned about it on a 5,000 square foot lot. And we do think that by requiring the development that might currently be by right, like the building at 1121 Greenleaf, by requiring it to go through the plan unit development process and having to meet the standards for special use and for the plan unit development, that we could be confident that whatever's built will be in keeping with the neighborhood that it's developed in, or in keeping with the adjacent properties that it's developed next to.
All right, well, let me start, if I can, with a request. John, would you share with us your thought process on 42 feet versus 40 feet versus some other number of feet, as well as the 3.0 for the floor area ratio? Why those numbers rather than some other numbers?
Yes, there was a number of things. First, we looked at buildings that have been built in the village, and in this case, buildings that were built by right. There were two buildings built in the mid-90s, as I mentioned, the Verona building on Greenleaf and the Optima building on 11th and Central. And while the Optima building on 11th and Central had a lot of people concerned about the appearance of the building, the actual massing of the building and the height of the building and the height of the building and the massing of the building and the Verona weren't a huge concern at the time. And I think we could also look at those and feel comfortable that those fit in and work in context with the properties that are in the same zoning district, but also those properties that are in the residential districts nearby. We also looked at 1121 Greenleaf, which was a by right building that's 52 feet high. And I think we could all agree, or I think most people would agree, that that building worked. That building fit in, and while that same building in another location in the village center might not be appropriate, it was appropriate in that location. That building is actually 52 feet tall, and so, you know, we surmised if you remove 10 feet from that building, which would ultimately be about a floor off that building, that's a height and a massing of a building that we as staff felt comfortable with, really, quite frankly, anywhere in the village center. And that's how we came up with that as sort of the tipping point to requiring the PUD process to be followed, and then in turn the standards for a PUD having to be met. So that's how we came up with that number. Originally, when we proposed the 42 feet, it had to do with, we now have a requirement that the first floor in the village center be 14 feet from the floor of the first floor to the floor of the second floor. But staff does not have any issue with, quite frankly, going back to the 40-foot height, which was what was in place when those two buildings in the mid-90s I talked about were built.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead,
I
Kathy.
want to make sure, sorry, can I ask a clarifying question? I was looking up something actually, John, and I missed one point. When you were talking about the 42, I think you said you looked at a 52-foot building. Were you talking about the Art House property, or were you
Yes, I was talking about the Art House.
So you were thinking about that building and how high it is, and thinking about if it were just slightly lower, that would be acceptable in the village center, is what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to find examples that we could actually look at and hopefully feel comfortable with. And I know staff was, in particular, really happy to see how that building at 1121 Greenleaf turned out, because, you know, that was our first and, quite frankly, our only by right building that we had built. And it ended up working on that site. Whether it would work on every site, I can't tell you that, and that's why this idea of now requiring that type of building to get a special use, PUD special use, probably does make sense, because, you know, we've got that concern, and that will help address obviously will help address the concern, at least in the short run, until the comprehensive plan process is complete.
I think it's important that we recognize that what we may be recommending here, and even if adopted by the board, it really is something of a placeholding exercise, because these are all things that will be part of the comprehensive plan discussion and analysis and review at, I would think, far greater involvement than this committee or even the board will be doing at this time. And it may very well be that at the end of the comprehensive plan review that the decision is to continue an approach like this, certainly in the village center, to use the PUD process fairly aggressively, or perhaps not. But certainly in my mind, I view this as a way that we can effect greater involvement both of the Plan Commission and the board and the residents in what gets built between now and the time, whenever it is, that the comprehensive plan evolves into something presumably different than we have currently. So I don't view this as anything close to the end of a process, but simply as a way that we can maintain the kind of engagement in what gets built in arguably the most critical part of the village, other than simply someone simply building by right at levels that may or may not be appropriate. And we certainly had plenty of discussion at the time we approved the Optima project about the appropriateness of that height or any other height. So in my mind, this is something that enables us to continue to have control over and input in what gets built until we can evolve into something that's frankly a little bit better known and reflects the input of residents, over many months. I would ask John, if you would briefly, for the sake of anyone that may be watching, would you briefly describe the PUD process? Because that's what we're essentially buying into here. If you would share with anyone watching or listening what that would bring to any development in the village center, I think that would be useful.
Yeah.
And actually, can I ask, just since you're going to do that, John, just since you and I spoke about this earlier, when you describe the PUD process, can you also describe how the special use requirement fits into that? Because I think those are both important. They're tied together. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, absolutely.
I think that would provide a helpful context.
So Wilmette zoning ordinance actually defines a planned unit development as a special use. So there are standards that all special uses need to receive, all standards that all special uses need to meet. And that could be a special use for a limited service restaurant, a drive-through, or a planned unit development. So there's a list of standards that all special uses have to meet. plan unit development is different in that there are additional standards for plan unit development. There are standards for all plan unit developments, and then there's additional standards for plan unit developments that are asking for relief of the code as it relates to bulk regulations. And that's, I'll touch on that in just a minute. So again, you have a special use, say for a drive-through or limited service restaurant, that's reviewed by the zoning board and that's recommended to the village board on whether to grant. A plan unit development is the only special use that the zoning board doesn't hear first. It doesn't hear. It's the plan commission who hears that and recommends to the village board. The plan commission hears what's called a preliminary plan unit development request. And ultimately they'll recommend whether that preliminary plan unit development should be approved. When somebody's coming in, they're going to show that they meet, again, the special use standards, and then the standards for plan unit development. And if they're asking for relief, and in this case relief that's related to the bulk of the building, they would also have an additional level of standards that have to be met. But also, that's when you get into public benefit. So the Optima building, because it was asking for height variations, they needed to, as a part of their approval, meet not only the normal the special use standards, the plan unit development standards, but also the standards related to zoning relief. A new building that might come through this, let's say the building at 1121 Greenleaf, maybe somebody finds the exact same property and wants to build that. They would go through the plan unit development process, have to meet the standards for special use, have to meet the standards for the plan unit development. But if they're not asking for that relief for the bigger building, the building that's exceeding height, setbacks and such, they would not have to provide necessarily public benefit as one of the standards, one of the criteria to meet the approval. So what this ends up doing is basically giving us the protections, because the plan unit development standards, as we know, are pretty broad. If they're the standards that we're reviewing, things like when somebody could do a drive-through or a limited service restaurant or a hotel, it seems to me that those standards, because we trust those standards when properly applied, are going to protect the surrounding properties and make sure that whatever's proposed, in this case in the village center, that is a building that's 40 feet high or 3.0 floor area ratio or greater, that those buildings are going to meet, that they're going to fit in and not be detrimental to the surrounding properties. Now, just on the plan unit development process, what happens is the plan commission recommends to the village board hears that preliminary approval. If the village board approves that, the applicant then comes back to get their final approval certified. Staff certifies it, brings it back to the village board to approve. There also is another step. There's a couple of steps that I didn't mention. One, if it's a mixed-use building that doesn't have affordable housing in it, 15%, they'll have to have what is called affordable housing consultation. And they'll have to wait, if they don't provide affordable housing in the building, they'll have to wait 60 days before they could apply. The second part of it is they need to have a pre-application meeting with village staff, and that's where they would show the village staff their concepts, and the village staff would make recommendations in regards to what was submitted as part of the pre-application meeting. And then after they make it through pre-application, they go to the plan commission for preliminary approval.
Can I ask a question here?
Yes.
So, take a building like 1121 Greenleaf that did this as of right. How much longer of a process and how many more steps would they have gone through to go through the PUD process? And is this something that would be a deterrent to developers, or do they kind of expect it nowadays?
You know, it definitely would take longer, because prior for 1121 Greenleaf, they only had to go to the Appearance Review Commission, and there was no village board meeting. So it will take longer. My guess for most properties in the village that would be seeking to go up to or to exceed 3.0 on floor area ratio or 40 feet in height, my guess is those developers are probably already looking at the plan unit development process, because they're probably going to want relief related to first floor residential space, maybe to parking, maybe to height, maybe to other requirements of the VC district. So while theoretically, if there was another building that was choosing to come in by right, yes, this would delay that. My guess is, depending on how quickly they could come back for final approval, it's probably a 3-month longer process.
And the 60-day waiting period for the affordable housing, that applies whether or not they've gone through a planned unit development process.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Have we heard from any I know this hasn't been on the agenda long, but have we heard from any developers? Any comments or?
No, I did hear from 3 property owners just wondering what it was about. They were people who owned properties that were fairly small, who quite honestly just dismissed this as not being a concern of theirs, just in part because of the size of their property. But no, haven't heard from any other property owners, but those property owners who have properties that are already developed and earning them income.
So let's say we were in the process and a property that would have been approved as of right because they met the zoning code as it is now. Obviously, we're going to go through the comprehensive plan, but let's say this 1121 Greenleaf came before the board, and as a board member, you know, what am I looking at? I mean, if they've met the, you know, by right requirements of the zoning ordinance as it was written, you know, where do I feel like I have leeway to say no?
Sure, I think it would have to do where and how the massing of the building's placed on the lot. I think that's probably the thing that would concern us most. The way that the village, and it was done on purpose this way, but the way that the development standards for the village center work, unless you're on a lot that is adjacent to a residential district, you can almost build lot line to lot line. On a lot that's adjacent to a residential district, you have to maintain a 25-foot setback. But as we know, even with the 25-foot setback, depending on the layout of the building and the configuration of the lots in the neighborhood, you might seek to see a building maybe laid out a little bit differently than if you know, if somebody came in with something by right, you know, we may have asked them through the special use process to relocate some of that mass. I think 1121 Greenleaf, because of the way that lot actually narrows to the back, ended up having a much greater setback than that 25 feet to the massing of the building. And not that if it was the mass of the building was right at that 25 feet, we would have had a lot of people concerned. You know, in the case of the Verona, I believe that's what that setback is there. And again, there were people who objected to that building, but I think it works fairly well. Could it have worked better if some of that mass was moved around on the lot? Maybe. it might have given some additional relief to the neighborhood to the south. But that's what you'd really be looking at, is how it's laid out on the property. My guess is most traffic and parking concerns are going to be able to be met. But you know that's not to say that there might be concerns related to that, depending on where the lot is and you know how busy the alley or the street that the development's looking to utilize.
And I'll just keep going, sorry.
Yeah.
Are we, in our, rewrite of the comprehensive plan, do we intend to just look at all this again? I mean, is this kind of meant as, let's get us to the comprehensive plan, or are we kind of thinking that we want to do this PUD process, down the line, or maybe we test it out and we see how it goes? Yeah,
my guess is between now and when we're done with the comprehensive plan, which will probably be like 2.5 years, we will get plan unit development, or we'll get development proposed in our village center. And so, as I think Chairman Barrow mentioned at the onset, there's a chance that this is our solution. There's a chance after we go through the comprehensive plan that this idea of saying, okay, we're comfortable with taller buildings, and we don't want to just outright prohibit them and make somebody prove a hardship to get a height over 40 feet. But, we're concerned. We just like any other special use, we want to make sure it's going to work. So we might find that this is our best answer. Notwithstanding the concerns that came up during the Optima approval discussion and the Imperial Motors property, that's a large property. We're allowing a larger building on the International Bank. That's definitely a question we had to slow down and, a concern that we had to look at. But removing that and removing lots that arguably have an impact on residential districts, Chairman Barrow asked about, and this is before we changed that 10,000 square foot requirement. He asked about lots that were 10,000 square feet or older. So I'm gonna pull up the GIS for a second, because oops, that did not work. That does not look like the GIS. Okay, well, I'm going to see if I could call up. Let me see, does this work? Okay, this isn't the GIS, but this is something that staff has taken a look at, these were properties where if somebody would choose to purchase lots and put them together, you might get a larger development site. And over here's Walgreens, and then you've got the vacant parking lot, and then you've got the auto repair. Here's Imperial Motors, here's International Bank, here's the village's property, and then the property with the pet store. This is the UP property, the Chase property. This is the funeral home property. And this is actually the property that I sort of wanted to talk about. This property, which doesn't adjoin residential, and has a condominium building on this side and a apartment building, multi-story apartment building on this side. This might be a piece of property where we actually would not have problem with a little bit greater height if we were able to get a benefit, say, of something like affordable housing. So, it's I think what my purpose of sharing this is more to the point that I do think the comprehensive plan, even as it's written, the master plan, the Village Center master plan, is still a very good document, and a document that served us well. I think that this pause, if we want to call it, by requiring more types of development to utilize the PUD process is definitely justified. I think, we were asked to, and it made sense for us to grant the building at 1225 Central. But then that raised questions that we have yet to answer, this is going to allow us to, when development comes in, get those questions answered without having to worry about something coming in that's by right that will negatively affect the character of the neighborhood. But again, I do think that the Village Center Master Plan has served us very well. And again, we might find going through the comprehensive plan, there's some tweaking we want to do with it. And it might have to do with adding additional controls when you're adjacent to residential or, something to that effect. But until we get there, I think this amendment's going to serve us well also.
So, Santa, did you have a few more questions you want to ask? I want to ask a follow-up to one of the questions you asked.
Yeah,
but
that's great. We got time. It's just the three of us. Go ahead.
So I just want to ask a follow-up question to what Santa was asking, which one of her first questions, which was, because I think it's a really good question, which was, how does this prolong the development of somebody, in terms of, because we're requiring a PUD, and you said it might, I want to make sure I understand, I think you said it might make it 3 months longer in terms of them getting approval. Is that your kind of?
Yeah, that would be if they were able to act really fast after preliminary. And if somebody was coming in with a building but before this amendment was by right, I would think that they would probably be able to move fairly quickly because it's going to be a building that's, quite frankly, probably not as complicated as, some buildings that we've seen in our village center. But yeah, I'm guessing around.
And so what I was confused by is then you said, but then there's this affordable housing requirement which requires 60-day notice.
Yeah.
So did the Verona property require the 60-day notice?
No. The Verona, the 1121 Greenleaf did.
So what's the trigger for affordable housing?
Well, it would be any new multifamily affordable housing. So it could be a mixed-use building like 1121 Greenleaf. The Mason, the Masonic Temple, which was converted, they had to wait. They had to have a affordable housing consultation, and they had to wait 60 days to submit any application. Now,
why didn't the Verona need to? Just so I understand.
Well, the Verona was built prior to the affordable housing plan being adopted.
The Verona property, the one at 11?
It's a different Greenleaf. It's a different one. It's not the new one on Greenleaf.
There's two buildings on.
It's the one.
The art house. The art house that's listed in the report is the new one that was built.
Right. The art house, but there's. I just drove by. I mean, the Verona is the one that's above the
Cashin Brothers.
Cashin Brothers, and that's been there for how long?
That was 96, 97.
That building was built?
Yep, it was built. That and the Optima building at 11th and Central were basically coming online at the same time.
Okay, so then I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So the art house, then the 1121. So when you were saying 3 months. Nowadays, is that on top of the 60-day requirement for affordable housing, or is it really only 1 month longer? I'm just trying to.
No, it would be on top of that.
It would be on top of that. Okay.
Yeah, it would be on top of that. Yep.
Okay, that's what okay.
But, the one part of the process, one part of the plan unit development process that could take place in that 60 days is the pre-application process. So the pre-application process doesn't necessarily add any time because that could happen in that 60 days because that's technically not an application. It would be then after that time expires where an appearance review will take a month to 2 months to go through the process. What we're talking about is probably 4 to 5 months somebody moving fairly quickly. You know, if it's something that ultimately was by right, everybody supports, and it goes to the Plan Commission once, the Village Board once, that would be about a 3-month delay. If it takes more than that, then we would have to figure that in.
And so you don't feel that 3 months won't be necessarily a deterrent?
The only reason I don't feel it will be is we don't get many requests to bring buildings in that are by right. It really, quite frankly, surprised us, the Greenleaf property, but I think they were able to acquire that property at a fairly low price, and so they were able to do that. Does that mean that, Wilmette might not get more popular and we might see more people attempting to do by right buildings? That might happen, but my guess is on the larger properties, be it the funeral home property, the property that I was talking about on Greenleaf, on the north side, the Imperial Motors property, the Chase Bank property, all those, my guess is there's going to be some form of relief that would trigger them to wanting to come in to go through the PUD process anyways.
Okay, so let me just follow up on that for a moment. I hear you, but so John, can you go to, in our material, slide 32, which is figure 10.1, which is the Village Center Street frontage map? And the reason why I'm asking you to bring this up is because I thought the way Trustee Barrow started the meeting was really applicable, which was really what started all of this was really the decision, well, from my perspective. So was really the feedback we heard from the residents that were surrounding the Optima building, some concern that we were starting to kind of veer away, right or wrong, veer away from kind of the overall master plan in terms of height and density of what was happening on Green Bay. Because we exceeded the height and density for the M&R property, and then we exceeded that for the Optima. And so from my perspective, what I was really concerned about was the Green Bay corridor, and making sure that we don't have another, I believe in a sense that my decision to support the Optima building was partly because I felt like I, communicated to the residents that we would be careful of what we allowed on the rest of Green Bay, and that we wouldn't allow another 4-story building right next to and building right on top of the Optima, as an example. And so when I look at this, when I look at what we're approving today, just so I understand on this kind of diagram here, so like what's happening on Central Avenue is we're just using some properties as an example, right?
Can you see that?
Yeah, can everybody see that?
Yep.
So, like, let's just use this property where the Land Lassie is, just for, okay, since it's empty, right? That's not adjacent to any residential property, right? And so, are we limiting, is actually, how much is, I don't know if that's its own building, I don't know enough about that particular.
Yeah, it is.
It is, okay, so that's a good, I guess I'm asking Trustee Plunkett and Trustee Barrow, do we want this particular policy or amendment to affect all the buildings in the Village Center, or only a portion of them?
I'll speak to that because I feel actually quite strongly about it. Yes, the concern that Kathy, that you described, came about as part of our Optima discussion, and the possible development of the Imperial Motors property in a similar height and density. But I think those same issues, frankly, are of concern throughout the Village Center. certainly across the street in the UP parking lot, which is certainly a very large parcel. But I think arguably includes the entire village center. When you walk around the village center to the extent you can these days, what you notice is really an absence of height. Sure, the Optima building that's there now is somewhat higher than some of the other buildings, but by and large, it's not the kind of massing and not the kind of height that could be built. Could be built as a matter of right, and certainly, I think, would have arguably a negative effect on the appearance, perception of our downtown. So I think these concerns cover the village center generally, and they're not simply limited to Green Bay Road. If we somehow controlled Green Bay Road, but in a sort of whack-a-mole fashion, a large development popped up, say at the funeral home property or some of the other vacant property or potentially vacant properties, I think our residents would say, why weren't you on top of this? We talked about density and we talked about height back in the Optima time, and here it is simply showing up simply in a different part of the village center. So my feeling on this is actually pretty strong and I think very clear, that we need to put controls in place. And again, we're not saying no. We're not effecting a moratorium on development, but we're putting controls in place that would be applicable to the entire village center. So that's at least my thinking.
I would agree with that. And I think I do want to make clear that, we're not saying no to density and height because, those things can be positives. But I do like being able to have this process to look at each individual one and make sure that it fits its piece in the puzzle. I had one question about something, that's in our ordinance that I just wanted John to explain, if now's a good time. Okay, so I've got this pulled up. So on 6.3 of the ordinance, where we talk about adaptive reuse and senior housing, can you clarify, it's 6.3B, notwithstanding paragraph A above, planned unit developments for adaptive reuse senior housing are permitted. Does that mean that those uses don't have to go through this PUD process, or would they also have to go through the same one?
No, actually, what that was done with the intent to allow something like Mellencrot or something like the Masonic Temple. Those two developments chose to go through the regular zoning process and not through the PUD process. But this is going to be a horrible example. But let's just say school like Loyola closed. Let's just say Loyola closed, and there was an idea to do an adaptive reuse of that for senior housing. That required a number of different reliefs. They could choose to go through the plan unit development process instead of asking for variations for that. So, and the reason that's in there is because most institutional buildings are in residential properties, and currently we do not allow the plan unit development process on residentially zoned land unless it's for an adaptive reuse senior housing development.
Okay, but like where we had the Masonic Temple, or if we had something like that was an adaptive reuse that, met the threshold over the number of feet and the 3 FAR, we're still going through the PUD.
Yes, if it's in the village center, right. The issue is that this is just in the village center, these limitations.
Right.
Right. So this isn't down at 4th and Linden where we have much stricter height controls so I don't know of an well, I mean, if somebody technically wanted to take Village Hall and convert it to
a house and move it across from the post office.
Yes.
Yeah. The library.
But we would see it completely redeveloped instead of adaptive reuse.
Okay.
Uh-oh. You're
Yeah, sorry, is the 40, are we talking 40 feet or 42 feet, first of all, in terms of what we're...
Do we need to decide that?
Okay, do we need to decide that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so is the 40 or 42 feet, then, whichever one we decide, is that the height to the roof or the height to the top of the building, the parapet?
That would be to the height of the roof. The parapet would be allowed 2 feet higher.
Okay, so whatever we decide, 40, 42 is to the roof?
Yep.
Okay.
If I can I give my opinion on that now, or are we at that point?
Well, technically we're not, but yeah, fire away.
If we're not talking about a difference of a floor here, I think most people would probably prefer that Optima building on Central and 11th was maybe a couple feet higher, so they didn't squish it so much, especially on the first floor. I mean, I think we do have stricter rules now about what the first floor would be, but I mean, if we're not changing, if the 2 feet from 40 to 42 does not break the threshold of adding another floor, I would rather go 42 so a developer's not trying to cram 4 floors into 40 feet again. That's just my opinion.
So to understand that, you're okay with 40 to the roof and 42 to the top, or 42 to the roof, 44 to the top?
Yeah, 42 and 44. I mean, if we are not, as I understand, that difference is not going to make a make or break on adding another floor, right?
No.
There wouldn't be. I mean, you're still so.
The only thing that I will point out, I think at 40 feet, and whether this is good or bad, I think 40 feet when if you're not going to ask for relief, you need to have 14 feet on the first floor. That leaves 26 feet for 3 stories with floors between. And you're probably going to be lucky to get 8-foot floors with that. Then that's what Optima did was make the first floor like 11 feet and then had 9-foot floors. But you can't do that anymore. So at 42 feet, that extra 2 feet makes it more realistic that somebody might choose to do that. I don't think they would, because again, I think there's a lot of other relief, but that 2 extra feet allows them to get more headroom in what are probably, or more vertical clearance in what most likely are going to be apartments or condominiums.
So would that, I mean, logically, is that the difference between a 3-story building and a 4-story building?
Well, again, Optima was able to do a 4-story building. Verona was able to do a 4-story building, both in the 40 feet. So it's possible. Again, I think with land values and the cost that it would be to do this construction, people, as we saw with M&R and Optima, they're wanting 9 feet plus ceiling heights in apartments and condominiums. To answer your question, I think it can be done 40 feet. It clearly was done for these other developments. It's, but is somebody going to want to have 7 feet 8 inches or 8-foot ceiling heights in a new building? Probably not.
But I think to Senta's point, using the calculations, if we required 14 feet on the first floor, and then a developer wanted to do 9 feet, right? 9 feet then on the other floors, that actually would get you to 41.
But then you need to put the floors in there. I mean, because that's clear height, 9 feet. If you have 9 feet clear height, you're going to have 8 inches to maybe 1.4 for the floor. So let's just say every floor is for your second floor ceiling, you have 1 foot. For your third floor ceiling, you have 1 foot. For your fourth floor, that's 3 feet right there. That now you're up to 17 feet. That leaves 23 feet left for the actual clearance, which is less than 8 feet per floor. If you add 2 feet there, you're still just over 8 feet. They're not going to be 9-foot ceilings even at 42 feet because of the requirement of the 14-foot first floor.
But the 14-foot first floor requirement, to get a variation for that, that's not going to trigger a PUD, right? Couldn't they just say, my building's only 40 feet tall, but I just need a variation for the first floor so I can get it back to fit?
They could. They'd have to prove a hardship, or a practical difficulty. And, I think the question might be, and at that point, the village board you might be fine with it and decide you could grant that. But yes, you're right. That would not be that shouldn't necessitate the PUD by itself.
I guess my only thing that I was trying to, I think the Optimum building on Central and 11th would look better if it had higher first floors.
Right.
And so I wanted to avoid a developer, trying to build something by right just to get under that threshold. I mean, I don't know that would ever come up again. Maybe I'm just picking out something that's too remote.
I do think that, barring you granting a variation, the fact is our ordinance says that first floor has to be from floor to, second floor has to be 14 feet. So that's probably 3 feet greater than you see what's at the Optima building. So, I think that regulation in itself is going to help solve that.
Okay.
Whether then we're going to have somebody who's building something with 7.5 foot ceiling heights, which I don't think's great, but my guess is probably not. So I mean, if you go to 40 feet, the ceiling heights, if somebody's trying to make a conforming building, are going to be under 8 feet most likely. Optima could probably do it because they're very efficient the way they build. And they might be able to do with a 40-foot building and our first floor height a 8-foot ceiling in the top 3 floors. So I think theoretically it's possible, but not easy.
Okay. All things equal, I say 42.
Yeah. Kathy, anything else on your mind, at least for the moment?
No.
No? Okay, Santa, how about for you?
Just looking through my Post-it notes.
We certainly can come back after we entertain a motion.
No, I like this. I like it. I think I don't have anything else to add right now.
Okay. Well, let me open up the meeting to any comments that we may have from the public. And John, can you indicate whether you see anybody on YouTube or typing or calling?
There are 2 people, one being me, that are watching on YouTube Live. Not sure who the second person is, but to this point they have not put anything in that chat.
Okay, well, we can, if something should come in before we all go away, we can certainly revisit it. So I'm going to technically close the public testimony portion of this and ask if, at least at any time, is there anything else, at least at this point, that either you, Kathy, or Senta, you want to raise with John?
I don't think so. Not for me.
No, either.
Seeing none. Well, then I think it's appropriate that we put this in the form of a formal motion. And I think, and here's someone better correct me, I think that what we need is a motion to recommend approving the text amendments to the village code as presented in the draft ordinance that staff presented to us for this meeting. John, would you say that that's a correct description of a motion?
Yes, I would.
All right, well, anyone want to make that motion, or?
Yes,
Say-
and so just to clarify, did that have, are we voting on the feet? Was the 42 feet what was in the draft, what was in the ordinance, right?
Right, 42 feet in the ordinance.
Okay, so moved, is that good enough?
Oh, that's great, and a
Yes.
second?
And I will second.
Very good. So now I would ask, is there any additional discussion that we all want to have before we actually take this to a vote?
I guess, Peter, I just wanted to ask, Senta brought up the comment about the 42 versus 40 feet. Do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, originally when I was thinking about this in my conversations with John, I was attracted to the 40 number because the 40 number reflects two buildings that you can actually see, that we and the residents have seen for many years. And those are heights which I would argue have over time become accepted, if not embraced. By the same token, I don't think that there's a great deal of difference between 40 and 42. And there is some logic to the 42 rather than the 40. So I'm happy either way. My sense, and I think John has said this also, that anyone showing up is going to be asking for sufficient variation that really won't be something that will actually be before us and before the Plan Commission when an actual building is proposed for us. So I'm fine either way. I don't see either as I don't see there being a material difference between either of them.
Okay, and so I just want to make sure then that I understand so the reason why I believe we don't think there's a material difference is both in the situation of Optima and the Verona. Nowadays, those both have a different height on the first floor than what we would allow by code, correct?
Correct.
And so at the time that those were approved, what was the height variation on the first floor? Do you know roughly?
I don't believe there was a minimum in place.
There wasn't a minimum. Okay, and so I think what you're saying is just to make sure I understand all the discussion we've had. Sorry, but just
yeah.
And so then I think what we're saying is the reason why there really isn't much of a difference between 40 and 42 is because taking into account now our first floor requirement, it'd be very unlikely that somebody could get to 4 stories without some other variance such that 40 or 42 is going to mean the same thing.
Yes.
So which
yes.
is,
I mean, I don't want to say it's not possible. I mean, somebody could do a 3-story building that has offices and go up to that height. So, but yes, I think it's unlikely.
Okay. So then I'm comfortable as well. I mean, I think from a resident's perspective, number of stories is really what they think about a little bit more than height. So if it's a 3-story building that's going up to 39 or whatever, that's going to feel a lot better to them than a 4-story building going up to 42, just because I think they see the balconies or whatever that is.
I think that's right, Kathy. I think it's absolutely right.
So
the perception is very different.
The perception is a reality, yes, as we spent a lot of, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we've had a motion, we've had a second. Mr. Adler, would you call the vote?
Trustee Dodd,
Yes.
Trustee Plunkett,
Aye.
Chairman Barrow.
Aye. So the motion has been approved, and it will go to the board with a positive recommendation at the December 8th meeting. So let me ask now, do either of my fellow trustees have any new business today for our committee? No new business. Well, then let me ask if anyone watching or participating in our hearing today, if they have any matter to share with us that was not on our agenda. Let's give that a moment to see if anybody responds. Hearing none. How about a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Very good. And so, Mr. Adler, would you call the vote on the motion to adjourn?
Trustee Plunkett,
Aye.
Trustee Dodd,
Aye.
Chairman Barrow.
Aye. So our meeting stands adjourned, and I thank you all, my fellow trustees and John Adler, for participating in this. And once again, the thoughtful presentation that staff has provided to us. And I look forward to the day when I have a meeting with all of you in person. So take care of yourselves and everybody be well.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.